Hello, everybody. I have with me somebody who you all probably know. I have best-selling author, Michael Witcoff. And I met him about a year ago at Orthodox Montanica. And I told him at the time, my channel was a lot smaller then, but I sent him a note after and I said, maybe when my channel gets a little bigger, we can do a little collaboration. And he probably wouldn't have wanted to come on my channel at that time because I had like less than 200 subscribers. But I sent him a note about a month ago or something, and I was inquiring, would you like to come on my channel? And he said, perfect timing. I'm just coming out with the book, and he has come out the book Fascism Viewed from the Cross right here, which we are going to be talking about in today's stream. So welcome to my channel, Michael.
Thank you for having me. And just to be clear, I would have come on with the 200 subscribers if you asked. I don't discriminate by follower count or anything.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. But I waited, and I think the timing was perfect, God's timing, because now we have this book to talk about. So most people who are subscribers to my channel, I imagine, will know who you are, but the obligatory, could you please introduce yourself for those who might not know you?
Sure. My name is Michael Witcoff. My internet name, so to speak, is Brother Augustine, which is actually my Oblate of St. Benedict name. There's been some confusion about what that title is, if I just made it up or anything like that. No, I did not. I've been Brother Augustine since my novitiate with that program 4 or 5 years ago now. I have a YouTube channel. I have a Gab account, even though I have like almost 3,500 followers on Gab, but I don't know where they are because I make posts and usually no response unless Andrew Torba retweets, or I guess it's not called a tweet, regabs the post, which he does sometimes. Then people see it. I have a Twitter account as well, a Telegram, but I've taken a big break from content creation lately for many reasons, one of which was to write this book. But that's neither here nor there. The short story is I was raised Jewish. I was an atheist my whole life. Got into the New Age, got into the occult, eventually became a Protestant, and then I became Orthodox Christian. I was baptized on Pentecost of 2018, which was in May that year. So I have been Orthodox for a little over 5 years, and in that time, most people know me either from YouTube, from interviews, or from my previous major book that people know about called On the Masons and Their Lies, which is about the incompatibility of Freemasonry and Christianity. There was a book between those two books about poetry that nobody really read. So that's why I refer to it as my last main book or last major book. And then Fascism Viewed from the Cross was just published a couple weeks ago. So thank you for having me on to talk about it. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Do you mind if I ask, what exactly is an oblate? What does that entail?
So the Orthodox Church has one Western Rite monastery in the United States, 2 in the world. Well, the other one's in Germany, a Benedictine monastery. There used to be many more. There was a major Benedictine monastery on Mount Athos for a while that was eventually absorbed into the rest of the community out there, but was a major monastery made of Italian immigrants to Mount Athos. And so the one in America is called the Monastery of Our Lady in St. Lawrence. It is run by Abbot Theodore. It is an Antiochian Orthodox monastery. It is a co-ed monastery. There are no nuns there at the moment because the last one passed away, I believe, last year. The number of monks grows and shrinks. The newest professed monk there used to be called Brother Lazarus, who some people have seen on YouTube. He was a novice there, then he left for a while and was Subdeacon Joseph, and he is now Dom Joseph Marie. He is the chef of that monastery, a phenomenal chef, really interesting guy, really interesting, smart guy. And so being an oblate essentially means that if you're an Eastern Rite Orthodox Christian, as I am in my normal weekly life, you basically, if you're a good oblate, which I admit I am not most of the time, you study the rule of St. Benedict, try to adapt it to your life in the world, because oblates can be monastics or lay people. I'm a lay person. My wife is also a novice oblate at that monastery who hopes to become a professed oblate at some point. And when we can, we go to the monastery. We've been there once together. doing the daily cycle of prayers in the Western Rite style, where you will hear Latin and very little Greek, at least more Latin than Greek, I should say. They do say Kyrie eleison at certain points. It's all Gregorian chant instead of Byzantine chant, and it follows the rubric of the pre-schism Western Orthodoxy most of the time. And it's just a different expression of our faith. It's blessed by multiple bishops. The ROCOR also has a Western Rite. It is opposed by no bishops. Some people have a real problem with the Western Rite and some of its practices. And I do think it should be kind of become more uniform at some point as to what's practiced or not. But people saying it's not Orthodox are simply wrong. And it is an Orthodox rite within our faith.
That's interesting. Our the previous first hierarch, our former first hierarch of the Russian Church abroad, Metropolitan Hilarion. This was sort of, I think it was kind of one of his special projects was to bring people from the Western Rite. Is that correct?
So since the monastery I'm part of is under the Antiochian Western Rite Vicariate, I'm not super familiar with how ROCOR is operated or how it was started.
Okay.
But I know that ROCOR has one, so it's certainly blessed by its ruling hierarch.
Okay. I think he was just open to those kind of things. So
I like your logo, by the way, up in the corner.
just remembered to put it up there. My godson Macarius, shout out, made it.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, thank you. Just made it, and right at the time where I reached 1,000 subscribers, I got my channel monetized, and he sent me that, and so it's all coming kind of together.
Nice.
Okay, so to the book. I want to start the interview with something that I noticed on page 13 at the introduction. You are saying that it says here the seed for this idea was first planted in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to know what was the idea for writing this book? What was that seed?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes.
Oh, okay. It was a combination of things. Part of it was my own journey, my own political awakening, and the various paths that I went down. I went down a path that I think is very common for people that start off as leftists. Not like I was an ideological leftist. It's just like I hadn't studied Karl Marx or anything. I was just raised to be a liberal. Democrat family, believed in abortion, gay rights, all that stuff. I started getting red-pilled on politics, mostly in college, where I started to push back against certain narratives, specifically through my entrance into the manosphere or the pickup artist subculture and kind of the associated ideas you learn from that, depending on how far you go with it, pushing back against feminism and rape culture, or the idea of rape culture, I should say, realizing just the enormity of the lies that people are told was kind of my first real inkling that something was not right politically, that we were being lied to, that there were people out there who were deliberately, willfully lying to young people to sort of create a grievance industry and make money off of it and sell books from it. That wasn't something I was really aware of before that. And then I saw that over and over in different political spheres, the same sort of modality, if you will, the same scam. So slowly kind of going through one red pill at a time, and through this and through, I guess, the stages of grief and the process of feeling betrayed that I think so many of us feel, I ended up going from very far left in retrospect to very far to the right. I think going beyond the royal path to a place that in retrospect I don't think was as spiritually healthy as it could have been, kind of because when you're starting on one side of the pendulum, when the shackles holding it there break, it just kind of swings to the other side. And then slowly kind of becoming more of that middle way or that royal path. So part of it was born of my own journey of exploring these movements and these ideas and kind of seeing and I'm not saying everything there is wrong necessarily. I try to be very objective and dispassionate in the book, but there certainly were a lot of things, depending on what you're looking at, that are not quite aligned with their faith. The other main thing was that as part of my political journey, I read most of Julius Evola's books, who, for better or worse, really influenced my understanding of democracy and revolution from below, which is what he would call, Bolshevik revolutions, or revolutions from the people, and not things being changed by an aristocratic class or the kings, the emperors, the czars, what have you, and just really kind of shaped certain understandings of mine And it made me want to baptize his ideas, just being Orthodox, coming back from going too far, I think, in the wrong direction. While seeing the good that was there, it made me want to provide something that would have really saved me a lot of time and trouble. And so I wrote this book largely to help people, to save them the years of effort that I had to go through and to spare them from the errors. Kind of like why I wrote my Masonry book, same thing. Hey, are you a Freemason and a Christian? Well, turns out you can't be those things, and here's why. Here's what I've learned. Here's why you should leave the lodge and join the Orthodox Church. So really, I just write things to send the ladder back down, as the saying goes, and help hopefully prevent people from falling into the errors that I fell into, while also showing them new ideas and kind of opening their eyes to certain things I may not have considered before.
Okay. I've never talked about my own political journey on this channel before, but I kind of had a similar trajectory. Grew up Democrat family. I went to a liberal arts college, and you just pick up the ideas around, so I was kind of I graduated in 2005. So I was just like, run of the mill radical leftist when I come out. And, but my journey was a little bit different. I never really I went straight after I graduated from college. I went straight into the church. That was my new college, my new education that I started to get. And so I was really focused on church life for a long time. And I didn't even have, I lived in this apartment. I've been living here for 18 years or something like that, 17. And for the first maybe 10 years of that, maybe longer, I didn't have a TV. I didn't have TV. I didn't have an internet. I was just sitting in my chair reading monastic books because I thought I was going to be a monk. And so I was sort of I kind of missed a whole decade of what was going on out in the world. But then at some point in time, I finally broke down and I got the internet. And I started getting into, similar to what you said, the red pill. I was, reading that kind of stuff, and that's kind of opened my eyes to the political face of the red pill, And so I started picking up those kind of ideas. So I think I probably followed a similar trajectory as you, and also, but I'm still not too much. I'm not too much into politics. It's not never really been ever since I joined the church, at least, there hasn't been a strong interest in mine. I more pick it up from ideas from people who are around me in the church. And a lot of people in the church are conservative and right wing and that kind of thing, at least my circle of friends. So I more pick up these ideas from the people I'm around. But so, yeah, you were saying you were reading Julius Evola, and you wanted to, with this book, you wanted to baptize his ideas.
I did.
So, I don't know too much about Julius Evola. I've maybe before you said this, I kind of only had heard his name. So who was he? Tell me more about him and, maybe his view on fascism.
So he was an Italian, painter, poet, philosopher between the world wars. He was a very committed pagan, unfortunately, really didn't like Christianity, deep into the occult, Hermeticism, yoga, things of that nature, which is unfortunate because he was brilliant and could have been a modern church father if he were Orthodox. And he wrote a series of books with very similar covers to this. In fact, one of his books is called Fascism Viewed from the Right, which is what this title is a play on. In which he critiqued various fascist movements from his view of the ideal of pagan imperium, really, like an imperial pagan empire, which I thought was a really interesting idea, and especially because he knew some of these guys. At least he knew Mussolini through exchanging letters. He met Codrianu in person. I don't know if he ever met Hitler face to face. I don't think that he did. And his books, essentially that book and A Traditionalist Confronts Fascism, he kind of goes through these different movements, and Imperial Japan as well. He goes through talking about what he liked or didn't like about them from his perspective. And I thought, how come no one has done this from an Orthodox point of view? Now, Father Seraphim Rose kind of did this with his Orthodox survival course, not in anywhere close to the depth that I have here, but he went through various philosophical movements, pointing out their errors. Excuse me, my throat is very dry. Pointing out their various errors from an Orthodox point of view. And so I wanted to kind of incorporate that idea of looking at these worldly movements, or movements of the world, perhaps I should say, from our lens in a way that no one had done before, that I thought could help people from going, like I said, too far in the wrong direction. Evola was very much believed in hierarchy, in authority, in a stratified society. He did not believe in equality or democracy or anything like this, because he saw this as fundamentally degrading to people who were of a higher, more aristocratic class. He thought it was bad for society to be run by, the kind of faceless masses. And he had a lot of disdain and a superiority complex in this way, which I don't think was a very Christian view. But some things he was right about, like the idea of universal suffrage democracy being absurd. Why should society be dictated by the whims and passions of the majority, especially if and when those whims are anti-Christian? For example, it's baked into all of us growing up American that this is not only a good system, but the only good system, right? It's the only good system to such a degree that we need to overthrow foreign regimes, even when the people like them, topple their governments, kill their leaders, and install our own version so they can have what we have, right? That's kind of the American idea of playing global police, perpetrator of these ideas. But why should if 51% of the people think abortion is good, why should Christians have to tolerate those opinions? Why should it matter what they want? The question is morality and should law be derived from something higher, something transcendent, which Evola agreed with, even though not in the Christian direction, or should it be derived from the opinion of the masses, which ultimately just means the opinion of whoever can propagandize the masses the most effectively? The masses as a whole, the NPC phenomenon is real, right? There are people that do not have any kind of inner dialogue, that don't think critically. They are swayed by hypnosis, which is what television is, which is what the news is. It is mass hypnosis, to quote David Icke, who's silly in some ways, but is absolutely right about that. And I say that as someone who graduated from the Hypnosis Motivation Institute. I am a certified hypnotist. I haven't done this in a long time. But when you understand the structure of hypnotism, at least in the way that the George Kappas and his son explain it in HMI, the Hypnosis Motivation Institute, it's so obvious what the news is. It's meant to build up anxiety and fear in you, which breaks what that school calls the critical factor in the mind, suspends the ability of a person to judge information when you suspend that critical factor, so that the messages of the messenger can get through and embed themselves more deeply in the subconscious. That's what hypnosis is, fundamentally. And when you build up anxiety or fear, it paralyzes that ability to judge and discern information, true from false, real from non-real. And so if you look at the news, obviously it's all negative, it's all terrifying. They don't report on anything positive, anything good, anything wholesome, because it keeps people in this state of psychological paralysis. And then whoever owns the media companies, whoever that might be, it's a total mystery, of course, whoever that might be, just gets to decide what the masses' opinions are, because the masses will tell you their opinions and defend these opinions as if they themselves thought through the information, came to these conclusions independently, when in reality, they just received this information and this value system from outside of themselves. And they will often agree with whatever the messaging is associated with in terms of what makes them seem like a good person, right? We call that, the thinking crowd calls this virtue signaling. When someone says they believe in something, and maybe even do believe in something, because that's what's been emotionally and psychologically associated in their minds with being a good, virtuous person. So they're sharing the beliefs and defending the ideas that they believe make them good, valuable, accepted members of society. But the problem is that's very intentionally designed by the people manipulating them. It has nothing to do with being good or virtuous or moral. So why should we let the opinions of these social programmers, LARPing as the opinions of the masses, control society? In that, I think Evola was very correct. And some of the fascists were very correct about that too. Hitler, despite his many, many mistakes, which I cover at length in the book, understood this process very clearly, both from from a perspective of what had propagandized the Germans so far, as well as how he himself could co-opt that process and then propagandize them again. And he was under no illusions about what he was doing. He didn't think the German masses were people that were, in his paradigm, really capable of higher thought as long as he could manipulate them. He writes about this at length in Mein Kampf. He has a masterful chapter on propaganda that even back as a copywriter we would study because it was so accurate. He knew what he was doing. He knew how to hypnotize people. And So once again, we see him being elected chancellor, right, by the German people because he was able to successfully manipulate them into believing his worldview, both the parts of it that I think we might be able to agree with and the many parts that we couldn't. But that's a long answer to a short question. I think Evola was correct that the opinions of the masses should have no real bearing on the direction of society. The question then becomes, who should have a say over that direction, which for us would obviously be the church, and its teachings would be the best answer to that question.
Okay, so how exactly, so he has his views, how exactly, like what did you agree with, what did you not agree with, and how did you change what he had to say in this book?
Well, I obviously disagree with him in terms of his complete disdain for other people. You know, he considered himself very nose in the air above everyone else, better than other people. And he would have, I think, admitted that quite openly. But I do think he was right that there needs to be something transcendent that society is based on. You know, for him, it was these ancient Far Eastern mystical ideas, where for us, it's technically also Eastern mystical ideas, but the Eastern Orthodox Church's mystical ideas, not those of the ancient Aryans or Buddhism or whatever he was playing with in any given moment. Because he did not believe in Christianity, he was very against it. Excuse me. And he did not have something like the church that he would have considered himself subject to, per se. Whereas for us, or for a genuine Christian leader, like we see in the Byzantine Empire, at least with the good emperors, the emperors were lay people technically, but were still themselves subject to the church and subjected themselves to the discipline of the church and the bishops if and when they went astray and were given a penance by the church.
Okay. So I noticed in your book, let's see, you start with this section. You're analyzing the Orthodox, basically the Orthodox approach to the state, politics, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then you go on and you are, in the second half of the book, you're analyzing three movements, Italy, Germany, and Romania.
Yes.
And in each of these, both the first and the second section, you have a complete section on the approach, well, the Jews. And this is kind of interesting to me. Why is that such a large part of this book, of your breakdown, the analyzing the approach, how people deal with, or I don't know how to say it exactly, but approach the Jew, that live in their country?
First of all, I think it's very brave of you to address this topic right after being monetized. So kudos to you for that. And I will try to not say anything to demonetize you, even though somehow my channel has not been attacked in that way yet by the powers that be. But it's important for a number of reasons. First of all, because I'm ethnically Jewish. I'm pure-blooded Ashkenazi, grew up Jewish. I've seen what an absolute spiritual dead end it is. You know, it cannot save you. It cannot sanctify you. Even Dennis Prager, I don't know if you saw his recent debates. I think it was with, who was he debating? Was it Peterson or Pajot or both? Or there was some Christian that he was debating with. No, I think it was Matt Fradd with Pines from Aquinas. Don't quote me on that, but it was somebody. And he openly admitted that Judaism was a behaviorist religion, where in Dennis Prager's point of view, looking at a woman with lust doesn't matter as long as you don't act on it. So it's entirely external. You know, this is exactly the thing Christ warns about with the Pharisees being whitewashed tombs, right? Looking clean on the outside and being dead on the inside. And Christ came and showed the Pharisees and the Jews at the time what the faith was always supposed to be about: the internal regeneration of the human being, the purification of the heart, soul, mind, the nous, the psyche. Where Christianity is not a behaviorist religion. Your becoming better behaved is almost a byproduct of the path of purification that internally regenerates and renews the soul. It's not about just don't do something bad. We are not a works-based religion, as some people accuse us of being. We don't believe, like the Mormons, that as long as you're a good boy or girl, you get to be a god of your own planet someday and have heavenly children and all these celestial wives or whatever it is that any given one of them believes. They kind of all believe something different, so it's hard to say what they actually believe these days. But it was important because I grew up that way. I had my bar mitzvah. As far as I know, no one in my whole family has ever been Christian, to my knowledge. But I don't want people to believe that there's something there that isn't there. We see all these Messianic Jewish movements, these Christian Zionist movements that act like Judaism is this, brother religion, or as the OCA recently put out, a certain priest wrote that he believes that contemporary Judaism is, quote, a true religion. Well, no, we don't believe that. The church has never taught that Judaism is a true religion. That phrase doesn't mean anything. Truth is singular. There's only one true religion from our point of view. There aren't multiple true religions. So you could say this is a true religion, but this one we're not so sure about. That's not the Orthodox view. That priest walked back his statement and got defensive about it, acted like he had said something different. But the document that he put out through the OCA said that contemporary Judaism is a true religion. No, it's not. It cannot save you. Christianity and Judaism had a parting of the ways a very long time ago. This was a huge focus of the ancient world. Both Christians Judaizing, right, participating in Jewish rituals and services, which is all the Messianic Jewish movement is today. This has been anathema to our church for thousands of years. St. John Chrysostom's 8 homilies about it. There's a whole genre of literature in the ancient world from our saints about this. So part of it was personal, why I wanted to address this and point out that if you want your soul to be saved, speaking to other Jews who might be pursuing the true faith out there, you have to leave Judaism. It's not going to change your ethnicity, but that religion cannot save you. It cannot do anything for you. The Orthodox Church, you'll recognize, depending on what kind of synagogue you go to, in that it's liturgical. You'll see how it fulfills what you grew up with. But you have to make a clean split. That is what's going to save you. And this is why Christ said, he's a dividing sword. He's here to divide. And father will be against son, and brother will be against mother, brother against brother, rather. He's speaking to Jews when he's saying this. He said, I understand what I'm asking you is extremely hard. I understand I'm drawing a clear distinction here, and it's going to make your own people really upset at you. But if you want to be saved, this is what you have to do. You have to die to yourself. You have to pick up your cross and follow him. And that cross, for a lot of Jewish converts, both ancient and modern, involves your family not liking it too much. Thankfully, my family's pretty okay with it. They're very grateful. They've seen how my life has changed, that I'm not just this fornicating, drug addict loser anymore. They've seen me grow up and become a real human being, for lack of a better phrase, which is what Christianity is, right? It teaches you how to be a real human, how to become a rational being, instead of just a stupid animal chasing your own passions. As to why I address it in the book, it's because I think, oh man, I got to be real careful with how I word this on a newly monetized channel. I think there have been a lot of times throughout history, including modern times, wherein people start investigating why things are the way they are, specifically investigating who is pushing certain forms of degeneracy, through what levers of power, who is funding certain things. And those people, if they pursue honestly, I think eventually realize that there's a disproportionate influence of Jews with these fields. I'm not saying all Jews do this. I'm not saying it's only Jews doing this. Some people do go that far and say, look, it's all the Jews are part of this. I think that's silly. I don't think that's realistic. And I don't think that takes into account the huge number of Gentiles that are also perpetuating these systems and participating. But we're talking proportions here, right? People look into these things and they find patterns over time. And then typically what's happened is there's been this huge uprising against Jews in various ways, been exiled over 100 times from various communities, sometimes more peacefully than others, and different countries have dealt with this differently. And so I wanted to show, okay, well, what's the Orthodox approach to these topics? What did our saints do or not do? What do our canons say to do or not do? What do our imperial Roman laws propagated by our saints say is okay or not okay? And then how does that compare with the way different countries and different leaders have handled it over time? And I wanted to show that there are certain things that have happened that are certainly not aligned with our faith. And people who might be getting really angry when they go through this red pilling process, because I think anger is part of that process, might be going too far and thinking certain solutions are acceptable or even the Christian heroic thing to do, when in reality, these are huge deviations from what our saints have always taught and how they've always handled themselves. So I was really hoping to just kind of give people some Christian boundaries to remain within as they go down this journey. People that are already on this journey, certain ideas are okay. Like, for example, it's very common to hear in the modern world that any criticism of Jews or Israel is, it's heresy, it's racism, it's xenophobia, it's anti-Semitic, whatever. Okay, well then are you calling all of our saints racist that have addressed this topic? The enormous number of saints that have addressed this topic. Is it anti-Semitic to criticize certain Jews for certain behavior, or to say that Judaism is a dead faith that can't save you? How do you reconcile believing that with the fact that our church has rather explicitly taught that Judaism is a faith that cannot save you? And so I wanted to, at the same time, show people that certain topics are not outside the realm of conversation, but other topics are outside the realm of acceptable Christian action. So really trying to just give a balanced overview of the topic.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. And so your book is really timely because you're analyzing periods of history when these nationalist movements were kind of on the rise and took power. And there are very many parallels to what is happening at this very moment. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
So this is another. Since we're talking about this subject, maybe this is a benefit of having a pre-recorded conversation. If it goes too far, I don't know really the YouTube's rules.
I don't either.
But too well. But if it goes too far, we could always delete it. But I had a guest on about a month ago. You might have seen it, Brother Nathaniel,
mm-hmm.
and he addresses this topic. This is one of his things that you could call a shtick, I guess. But I had somebody send me a message on Facebook and said, I unfriended you because you had him on your channel.
Mm.
And he said, and the person in this message said, anti-Semitism is a sin that is running rampant through the Orthodox Church right now. Mm. And so I want to ask you a question. What do you think about the term anti-Semitism, and would you agree with this criticism?
I think the term has a real meaning and a fake meaning, and that what's typically propagated is the fake meaning. I think the real meaning I would categorize as any other kind of genuine racism in terms of hating someone because of their ethnicity, which I would agree is a sin and is wrong and is not Christian. It's typically used, in my opinion, as a way of halting the mouth of critics of Jews or Judaism or Israel, just as a way to censor and shut down conversation. And I think that's the fake meaning. And I don't think that is a helpful thing to do really at all. I don't see who it helps. I think that there is a whole Jewish grievance industry, like the ADL and Jonathan Greenblatt, for example, who deliberately propagate this myth of everyone's anti-Semitic, everyone hates us, everyone's trying to genocide us, because it makes them a lot of money. The ADL, it makes a lot of money and power. Like I mentioned with rape culture earlier, right? This grievance industry that isn't real, or telling all black people that all white people are oppressing them and all the white people were slave owners. In reality, less than 2% of whites were slave owners at the peak of slavery, right? There's more black slaves in Africa right now than there ever were under white masters in America, but no one seems to take that into consideration or care about those people. So I think it's a grievance industry that has abused this term that, if it has a genuine meaning, is just so buried in all the propaganda that it's become meaningless. And as for Brother Nathaniel, I talked with him years ago, trying to get him on my show once upon a time. Didn't really work out. I will say he and I go about this very differently. He has a certain, I think when you leave Judaism for Christianity and you realize the extent to which you were lied to growing up Jewish, whether consciously by your rabbi in your community or by just them telling you things that turned out not to be true, whether that was willful on their part or not, I think there is a bitterness that is part of that, but I've tried really hard to move past that bitterness and be more dispassionate. And so, yeah, he and I do have different approaches, and I can see why his approach, with all due respect to him, I'm not trying to speak ill of him, I can see why people get very upset about the way that he goes about doing things. Even if I agree, in concept with what he's saying, I think the way that he says things probably brings that accusation of anti-Semitism more forcefully and frequently than I do, even when I'm fundamentally not disagreeing with him, if that makes sense.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'll defend him a little bit because he's more focusing now on this Bible with Brother channel on YouTube, and in which he doesn't talk about those issues. And in my private conversation with him, he told me he didn't really want to even be doing the other videos that he does, which are not on YouTube, on his own private, his own website. So I think it's just he's into it now. It's kind of hard to stop doing it.
And can I address that for a second?
Absolutely.
I think that's a very valid thing you just said because, and this is something I've experienced as a content creator as well. It's very disheartening to make serious Orthodox content about the scriptures or about our divine services and have it be by orders of magnitude the least viewed, least engaged with content that you make. It's very heartbreaking. You make videos about politics or about drama or controversy or celebrities, and it will get tens of thousands of views. But if you try to talk to people about the scriptures, unfortunately, many Orthodox on the internet, at least the kinds of people that are in these circles, they don't care. They're not going to watch it. They don't want to read the Bible. They might go to church every week, but the last thing they want to hear about is what's happening during the Divine Liturgy. I've done 2 parts of a planned 3-part series going step by step through the Divine Liturgy. And the last video I did, I think, is the least viewed video I've ever done, or at least one of them, which is it's so painful to see that. Like, why don't people care about what we're doing? What are you engaging with in the liturgy? What's being symbolized? What are the different parts of the service? But I understand where he's coming from in terms of, like, I don't want to do this, but sometimes you have to kind of put forward a face of what you're going to talk about with the Orthodox internet, and then almost sneak in the edifying stuff, because if you front load it with that, they're just not going to watch it, which is a really unfortunate situation.
That is so well stated. Like, that was what I was thinking, but I wouldn't have been able to elucidate it so well. So well done. Now let's get more into the book a little bit. I'm gonna shift a little bit here. So the second part of your book, you're talking about Italy, Germany, and Romania. And we only have so much time. So we'll see how much time we have, because we're gonna go for about an hour. But let's actually start with Romania, because this is the least well known, historically. So we have this fellow Codrianu. Is that how you say his name?
I think so.
And he started. He had a whole movement that he started, a political movement. Which can you tell us how that started? Maybe explain the situation in Romania, the cultural milieu, how he came to rise up, and his movement and all that. Could you start with the history?
Sure. So after World War I, just like with Italy and Germany, Romania was very devastated by the war and its fallout. They tried to do a bunch of agrarian reforms that really failed badly and left everybody worse off. They tried to do kind of a power to the people type of thing with the farms and give the peasants more power from the nobility. And it really didn't work. Everyone was in a worse position. And at the same time, Jews were immigrating in quite large numbers to Romania. And in Romania, Jews really stuck to themselves. In Italy, Jews kind of assimilated into the culture much better under Mussolini, whereas in Codrianu's time in Romania, Jews were very, very insulated, very insular community, stuck to themselves, didn't want to assimilate into Romanian culture, didn't really want to be part of the country, and yet were being granted citizenship and were going into the universities. And through the universities, were being fed into the higher level elite jobs of Romania, like the doctors and the lawyers, scientists, things of that nature. And so Codrianu was simultaneously trying to help the basic, the everyman of Romania, just the working class guy that wanted this country to be better, while also dealing with this issue of this very alien culture that was refusing to assimilate, that was taking over all the highest level jobs and thereby preventing Romanians from bettering themselves. So you can see how, especially given his role models growing up with different rulers of that region that were very well known and were considered heroic for expelling foreigners. It was a big part of the Romanian cultural, political milieu at the time. He never wanted to kill Jews or anything like that. In fact, he was very strict with his guys against violence against Jews. The one time some of his guys they didn't threaten Jews, they refused to pay for their food at a bar. and said, don't mess with us, we're Codreanu's guys, he disciplined those guys immediately and wrote about this in his autobiography. He was always against that sort of thuggish violence. So he really wanted them not to be naturalized citizens, not to just have this big group of immigrants be granted citizenship all by stroke of a pen, which did happen. So when that happened, he was a law student at the University of Iasi, and him and a bunch of other students rose up against this, especially because the Jews were all pretty much communists at the time. Pretty much all of them were communists. And the media organs they were in control of were always ranting against Christianity, against the church, against the crown, the monarchy, basically against all the pillars of Romanian society that Codreanu, as the son of a soldier and as a hardworking peasant class guy, all the things that he loved and cared about, that most of Romania cared about: their king, their military, their church. So he really wanted to not have that bill go through, naturalizing all the Jewish immigrants. He didn't succeed in that, but it started as a student movement, him and these other guys, that just wanted to fight against not even just Jews, but mostly the traitors of Romania that were allowing for this sort of cultural, political degradation to take place. In fact, he once said a very famous quote that I've always liked. He said, "If I had but one bullet faced with an enemy and a traitor, I would let the traitor have it." So this differentiates him in large extent from certain other fascist leaders who just blame the Jews for everything. Codreanu always understood that it was the sins of the Romanian people that were allowing this situation to unfold, that it was them who were sinful, them who were not living righteous lives, them who had fallen away from God and loyalty to their people and their country, that was allowing this. He realized Romanian sin was the soil in which these weeds were being planted and grown. So he always was promoting, first and foremost, the Christian renewal of his own people before anything else. And he always said, we're not trying to create new programs, new politicians. What we need is a new man, a new kind of man, a Christian man, a regenerated man, a spiritual warrior. He demanded prayer and fasting of his followers, demanded celibacy of his shock troops. He was always focused on self-control in this Christian sense. But he just really wanted, at the end of the day, to deport Jews to Palestine peacefully. He didn't want to hurt anybody, and just wanted Romania to be for Romanians again. And he was the recipient of this current of thought in Romanian politics at the time, 100 years, maybe 50 years, let's say, of these Romanian nationalists that he considered himself to be kind of receiving and passing forward this current of thought. And that was the basic context for how the Legion came about.
Okay, and then they eventually, not in his lifetime, right? But the movement sort of did come to power, and they were in political power eventually, right?
Yes, for a couple of years after he died, or was assassinated, I should say, the Legion did come to power in what was called the National Legionary State. It was led by a man named General Ion Antonescu, who a couple of years after this situation arose ended up suppressing and arresting all the legionaries anyway. Oh. So their reign was very, very short.
Oh, okay. So he's got this, you said he's got shock troops. Yeah. So these are like people that are, would that be kind of like, I don't know, what do we have here in America? We had during like the 2020, the guys who wear the yellow.
Oh, like Proud Boys.
Yeah. Is that kind of like Proud Boys? Is that what that is?
I do respect what the Proud Boys did in terms of having a physical presence against Antifa. I think was a good thing. I'm glad somebody was doing it. I actually witnessed one of these episodes myself at a Stop the Steal rally back in my more political days. I watched them. A bunch of kids showed up to the Stop the Steal rally causing trouble, and they got their butts handed to them by the Proud Boys. I filmed the whole thing. I shared it with them via Telegram. And afterwards, the Proud Boys were respectful of their enemies. One of them said to me, this kid that they really beat up quite badly, they said, "Man, that kid was brave. I wish he'd be on our team." That's a good kind of respect for your opponent that I like. But the Proud Boys are also, a lot of them are Christians, but there's also kind of this acceptance of more secular morality among them than I think a Christian movement would be if it was explicitly Christian. But yeah, I do. I had one on my show once upon a time. Brad Burris, a friend of mine, a phenomenal painter, who wore black and yellow. I think he had a black and yellow hat during our video, actually. So yeah, Codreanu, though he didn't believe in thuggish violence, like just roughing people up or mugging people or cheating Jews on their bar tab, he did believe in a physical presence against communists. There was an incident where, for all of the University of Iassi's history, it would open each year with the blessing of the bishop. And there was a year when 300 communists were basically outside the university, demanding that it be opened without the blessing of the bishop. So trying to secularize this institution that had always had this Christian blessing. And Codreanu, man of courage that he was, went there by himself and fought them. He fought against everyone around him, this big group of 300 enemies, and it created such a scene that the communists eventually lost, and the university did not open without a blessing from the bishop. So that kind of thing, I think, takes a real faith and a real courage and a real bravery that is very rare in not just his time, but in the world in general. So he had shock troops that some of them went off to fight for Franco in the Spanish Civil War. A couple of his top guys died as part of the Foreign Legion in Franco's Civil War. But just the guys he would use for stuff like that. Or for example, there was a train station that communists had taken over. So him and his guys got on a train, and then when the train arrived in the station, they poured out of the cars and they took over the train station and they replaced the communist flag with the Romanian flag. So they would do really cool stuff like that, that it did involve physical force, resisting evil by force, as Ivan Aline would say. But in terms of like killing people, there was an incident where they did plan to assassinate a small group of people, not a group, individuals, a small group of individuals, some of whom were Jewish, some of whom were not. Very targeted violence. So there was certainly a forceful aspect to what they were doing. And that was more the Iron Guard, was more the militaristic aspect of the Legion of Archangel Michael.
And didn't Mussolini, he had some similar kind of arm of his movement, right? He
had the black shirts, yeah. And he marched on Rome with the black shirts, and hundreds of the black shirts were Jewish, ironically. At that time in Italy, there was no reason for Jews not to be fascists. A lot of the conservative Italian Jewish patriots, especially the ones that had fought in World War I or their families were veterans, were much more in line with Mussolini and fascism than with the socialists that hated the country, hated the veterans, hated the military, and things of that nature. I don't know if any of the Iron Guard were Jewish. I suspect they were not. But one of Codreanu's top guys, Vasily Marin, was married to a half-Jewish woman. So she was an Orthodox Christian, but she was half Jewish by blood.
Okay. Well, what I guess when I mentioned the Proud Boys, I guess what I wanted to talk about was that, we have like the cultural milieu right now that's going on. Our society is kind of degrading and the degeneracy, and I think that like people who are right wing and conservative are on the ascendancy in the United States and worldwide right now, right? Wouldn't you agree?
I hope so. Yeah. I hope so.
I mean, it seems like a similar kind of thing is sort of, this might take time. I don't know. Do you see a political movement starting here, for example, in America, and, something similar to what you describe in the book?
I don't know. So if you look at what's happening in France right now, and I say this with the caveat that I have not watched the news in over 3 years, but I hear about things, or I see them on social media, or someone will tell me about it at church, or my wife will tell me. So if you look at what's happening in France right now, and you look at how similarly that demographic and that attitude has taken root everywhere in the Western world, I think the only two possible outcomes, frankly, are that every country is going to fall the way that France is right now, or like we got a taste of with the Black Lives Matter riots during the Trump years, or there's going to be some sort of more conservative uprising that really squashes this stuff. I don't see any third option at this time necessarily. And I think that the enemies of conservatism, morality, God, Christianity, they're very aware of this, and they have been for a long time, and they've spent decades putting their own people into positions of power while breaking the paths or cutting off the paths to power for people that would stand up to them very, very effectively.
That's true.
I don't know whether America is going to become like France. I mean, it already is in the inner cities and during the Black Lives Matter riots. You see this just wanton violence with absolutely no pushback, or in Trump's case, offering them $500 billion as a reward for their violence, unfortunately, which is not the way I think a good king would handle something. It's going to be one or the other. I don't see a peaceful coexistence happening the way that things are going right now. But I don't know which way it's going to go. I'm not a
right. Yeah, it seems like, well, it is. You're right. It is true that they have. They're very effective at infiltrating and making sure any organization of people, comes to nothing. They're very effective at they've got their sights on those, organizing people. If anybody becomes a leader, and people, start. Well, they can just tear down a leader like nothing. They'll just tear people apart,
And that's the tricky thing. Like for these kind of movements, like what we see with Codriano, for example. I mean, there wasn't the internet back then, right? He wrote in his prison diaries he thought he had about 1 million people following him. Evola said it was about 600,000. These were mass national movements of people all on the same page, doing things mostly in unison. And today, like you said, the surveillance network that the feds have is just so unbelievable. Like, I'm not comfortable joining any group. Not that there's a group that I would join if one existed. I see different problems with different groups. Some of them I like more than others. But I myself would never join one of these things or start a political movement because I feel that it would immediately be infiltrated by feds, or something would happen. Right. They really know what they're doing. These leftist criminals, these moral criminals.
But I have heard you talk about before creating brotherhoods, Orthodox brotherhoods, local kind of things. We have that here. We have one in our parish, which I think is actually very beneficial. Politics is, that maybe we should focus on getting right with God. That's probably, a good place to start.
I completely agree. And I think you're right. If you're going to do a movement or a brotherhood, I think the best thing to do at this point is you have a local community that helps each other out. Hey, someone needs work on their house. Let's get a bunch of guys and go do it. So-and-so needs food brought to them, or they need medicine brought to them, or they need to go to the doctor. A group of people that really have each other's backs locally without getting involved in things that will get you on the bad guy's radar, per se, I think is probably the best option now, so that if and when things collapse, you'll at least have a local community of people that can take care of each other. I think that's ultimately more effective at this point in time than things that may have been more effective in the past.
Okay. Now I'm going to start to wind down the conversation here. So you have a 360-page book here. What were the some of the books that you read to prepare for?
Oh, so many. So many. Pretty much everything on my desk here. A couple books by Robert Wilkin about Judaism and early Christianity. I read Mein Kampf. I read Mussolini's autobiography. I read 2 of Codriano's books. I read 2 of Evola's books. What else did I read? Controversial Concordats, which is about the concordats between the Vatican and various fascist leaders, and also Napoleon's included in that book. I read a really good book called Hitler's Religion by Richard Weikart, which I quote a lot in my book. That really goes through the Third Reich and Hitler specifically. What did he believe or not believe? Because that's such a controversial topic. If you ask the internet what Hitler believed, you'll hear he's an atheist, he's an occultist, he's a pagan, he's this, he's that. And so it really goes through all the available evidence, and I think makes the most compelling case that I've seen for what he believed or didn't believe. And even with all this evidence, it's hard to say if he actually believed in anything in any kind of coherent, systematic way. I'm not sure he did. I think he had some concepts that he liked, but I'm not sure there was any real coherence to it. What else did I read? A great book, probably the most expensive book I own, called The Jews and Roman Imperial Legislation by Amnon Linder, which goes through all the imperial laws that I go through in my book. See, that was like a $90 book, and the sequel's even more expensive. What else did I read? There's a bunch of books I read as research that I didn't end up including. But overall, I mean, I've had this book going around in my mind for over 2 years. It's gone through different versions. The first version was much more American, talked about Trump and Nick Fuentes and Patriot Front and Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA. I'm really grateful I didn't put it out back then because I've lost so much of my interest in politics since then. That's right at the peak of when I was really interested in following everything, reading articles every day, watching political videos all day. What's Trump doing? Following Q for a while. Lord have mercy on me and my stupidity back then. And then over time, I stopped caring to such a degree about what was going on that I didn't even want to look at it as research. That was part of my motivation. Like, I don't care what American politicians are up to. I don't believe any of them are the solution to what we're facing. I don't think they have a clue how to solve the problems here. And I think even when they do have a clue, they're largely kneecapped and handicapped from being able to do it, either by their own ineffectiveness as leaders or by the powers that be that don't want them to do it. And so as the more I realize that the solution is not who in office, who's our senator going to be? That's not going to solve our problem. I stopped caring, and I didn't want the book to be frozen in time. I didn't want it to be a 2023 book about movements in modern America. I wanted it to be something that was timeless, that people could look at for the rest of history as an Orthodox view on fascism, and then let them, looking through that lens, examine their own contemporary movements and come to their own conclusions about what's Orthodox, what isn't, what's Christian, what isn't. So I didn't want it to be like that. And I have also matured a lot spiritually since this book first started taking form. I think I was still very unbalanced when I was in the early drafts, very political, like I was saying. I was also still taking testosterone at the time I started it, which I think probably had a lot to do with my fire and my zeal for politics. And I haven't taken that in a long time. Back then I was really into bodybuilding and whatnot. So
did you take that because you were tested low or just?
So I got really sick for a while and my testosterone tanked like 40% after I got sick.
Yeah, sure.
And so I took that to kind of get back to normal, even though for me, I was flying high on doses that for most people wouldn't affect them that way, because I think my mind is naturally quite high and I'm a hyper responder to testosterone. So like me with a level of between 700 and 800 nanograms per deciliter might be like someone else at 1,000 or 900. But that's neither here nor there. I was using it to do bodybuilding and I got really ripped. And then I realized this was all just vanity. I believe men should be strong. Obviously, we have to protect our family, our community, if need be, especially if you do a manual labor job like I do. You have to be strong, and you don't have to be in shape, because there's a lot of people out of shape, but it certainly helps to be in shape. But, taking pictures of my popping veins and six-pack, posting it to Instagram, in retrospect, I don't think was the most dispassionate Orthodox way of going about my life. So I just stopped doing all that stuff.
Okay. And so this is your third book. Do you have any plans for a fourth?
It's funny, because you'd think that after publishing a 350-ish page book that took me years, I'd be like wanting a break or a rest. But really, after I clicked publish, I was like, all right, what's next? I got to do something else now. The idea for the next one hasn't quite come to me yet. I might do a book on original sin, just because there's so much trash around that topic in the Orthodox world. People are so clueless about what we teach and what we don't. A century of theology has been ruined, specifically by one individual that wrote 100 years ago or so on this topic that I won't name. Those who know. I might have to undo his damage to our church in that regard. But in either case, I'm going to take a break for a while, try and get this book out there, see what difference it's going to make, try to get Amazon to let me advertise, because right now it's not letting me advertise my Mason book. After 5 years, they decided my cover was too violent, it's a painting. And I submitted my ability to advertise for this book, and I've been waiting like 2 or 3 days now to hear back whether I'm going to be allowed to, but I don't know. But in either case, I think I'm going to do the interview circuit and just kind of get feedback from various clergy. A lot of priests and deacons have a copy of this book now. I'm waiting to hear their feedback. Father Turbo has a copy. I'm really curious to hear his thoughts. Father Peter Hears has a copy. I'm really curious to hear his thoughts. I just read his latest book, which is not available yet, that I'm going to do. I was scripting a video response to today.
Was that Ignatios or something like that? Or
the book on Saint Iakovos is not the book I'm talking about. I will give the world a little sneak peek. Forgive me, Father Peter, if I'm not supposed to, but this is supposed to come out soon. This big old book on the reception of the heterodox into the Orthodox Church, the patristic consensus and criteria about baptism, chrismation, the canons, corrective baptism, all these topics that are super controversial. He told me his timeline for this is a few weeks.
Okay.
But he also told me that this was going to be out like 2 years ago. So who knows if these timelines are reliable. But this is a really interesting book. I think it's a very important book, even though I have some qualms with certain aspects of it. When this comes out, you guys are going to want to get this. I think this could be really, really big. I think it's going to be really big. But yes, the St. Iakovos book I have not read yet. My priest has a copy of this book. He's going to hopefully read soon. A lot of deacons and priests have emailed me asking for copies. So I'm hoping to get some clergy feedback, update the book if necessary. Like my last book was totally changed by a priest emailing me and asking me to do certain things with it, to make it more of a handbook for clergy trying to deal with masonry in their parishes. So I kind of rewrote the book according to that. So we'll see what happens with this book. But I think over the next few months or years, I'll have my work cut out for me. Yeah, long answer to a short question again, but we'll see what happens. I just try to keep my foot on the pedal, but ultimately God's got the steering wheel here.
Sure. Good. Okay. Anything else you want to say? Here's your chance.
I just really appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk with everyone about this book. If anyone's watching this who's already read the book, if you've tried to submit a review to Amazon, please be aware that several reviewers have had to submit the review twice before it lets it up. I think I'm on an Amazon naughty list at this point, because the first submission is just not going through. So if you've submitted a review that you don't see up there, please submit it again so it'll go through. Other than that, I really hope this book's going to make a big difference for a lot of people and help people avoid some of the many errors that I have made in my life. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come get this message out there and hopefully make a positive difference in our church and in the world.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you for writing the book and thank you for coming on my show. I'll put a link to the Amazon, to where you can get the book on Amazon in the description. So Brother Augustine, thank you so much. And that is our show for tonight. Goodbye, everybody.